The station smelled of coal and cold iron, and the sun bled its last light through the forest of steel beams above us. Trains hissed like restless beasts, their wheels glinting in the amber dusk. Clara stood beside me, her face as polished and composed as porcelain, eyes fixed somewhere beyond the crowd. Then, without turning, she whispered it, sharp, deliberate, meant to pierce. "You're not family, Elias." Her voice didn't tremble. Mine did, though I said nothing. Not yet. The envelope in my coat pocket felt heavier than it had all day, as though Uncle Thomas's ghost was gripping it from the other side. I had carried it since the funeral, unopened, as instructed, but now, with Clara's words burning in my ears, the seal felt like a lock I had every right to break. I pulled it free, my hand steady despite the heat rising in my chest. The platform's murmur shifted. People noticed. A man with soot on his jacket stopped mid-step, curious. I tore it open. The title on the first page caught the dying light, "Last Will" in bold, solemn print. The crowd quieted in increments like a curtain lowering until I could hear only the ticking of a station clock somewhere far above. Clara's lips tightened. "Don't!" she hissed, but I was already reading, my voice loud enough to rise over the clang of metal and the whistle of a departing train. The paper trembled slightly, not from my hands, but from the weight of what it carried. "To my dear Elias," it began in Thomas's broad, careful script, "you have been my son in all but blood. Let no one, not even those who share my surname, tell you otherwise." My throat caught at those words. The crowd exchanged glances. Somewhere behind me, someone muttered, "Did he just say son?" Clara's cheeks flushed. She looked around as if searching for someone to stop me, but there was no stopping now. The will went on, speaking of debts of the soul and a promise forged in fire and steel, 1944. The numbers hung in the air like a distant gunshot. Thomas's voice, alive in ink, described a man who once saved his life and the child that man entrusted to him. I read the words without pause, though my own heart was stumbling. Clara folded her arms, but her knuckles were white, and then came the sentence that froze the station in its tracks. "The truth of your inheritance is arriving on the 7:15 train." The sound of it rippled through the listeners. I looked up. The clock read 7:13. The crowd seemed to lean forward as one, and in that breathless space between minutes, the whistle of an approaching engine rose from beyond the bend in the tracks. Clara's gaze flicked toward the sound, but her eyes, unlike mine, were not filled with hope. They were filled with dread. The whistle's cry deepened as the 7:15 rounded the far bend, its headlamp a single white eye cutting through the dim. Steam bled across the platform, curling around boots and legs, swallowing shadows whole. My heart hammered, not from fear, but from the certainty that Thomas had planned this moment with a clockmaker's precision. Clara stood stiff beside me, her eyes darting between the train and the page in my hands, as though trying to decide which was more dangerous. The will's next lines described, "One man who can vouch for the bloodline," a phrase that seemed to slice through Clara like glass. She let out a laugh that wasn't laughter at all, short, sharp, and meant for the crowd. "He forged it," she called, her voice pitched for the people leaning in from the edges. "This is a performance, nothing more." Murmurs began, but none dared to interrupt outright. Something in the air, the feeling of a story unspooling in real time, held them still. Steam hissed from the train as it slowed, brakes squealing against metal. Faces leaned from windows. Strangers stepped down onto the platform, scanning for their people. I caught sight of him then, far at the other end, a tall figure in a dark overcoat, his hat shadowing his face. He didn't carry luggage, he didn't look around, he looked only at me. The crowd's whispers shifted, growing into a low tide of speculation. I glanced at Clara, but her gaze had already found him too. There was something in her expression I hadn't seen in years, fear without disguise. The will slipped in my hands, the paper catching the wind from the departing cars, but I held tight. "Do you know him?" I asked. She said nothing. Her silence was an answer. The man began to walk toward us, his stride slow but unyielding, like someone approaching a finish line he'd been chasing for decades. Thomas's words echoed in my head. "He will find you when the time is right." My grip tightened on the will. The train clanged shut behind him, pulling away into the night, leaving him on the platform with us. He stopped 3 paces away. "Elias Ward?" he asked, his voice deep and weathered. I nodded, unsure if I should be relieved or afraid. "I knew your uncle," he said, "and your father." That last word hit like a shovelful of earth on a coffin. The crowd gasped audibly, heads turning between us. Clara took a step back, her heel knocking against a suitcase. "I have something of his," the man continued, slipping a gloved hand into his coat pocket. The moment stretched, the station lights flickering once as if to mark it. Then he pulled free not a letter, not a trinket, but a small, worn photograph, its edges frayed with decades of travel. He handed it to me without a word. In the picture, a soldier knelt beside a small boy standing in front of a train. The boy had my eyes. The photograph trembled between my fingers, though the cold had little to do with it. The boy's round face and solemn eyes stared back at me, as if daring me to deny the likeness. Behind him, the soldier's shadow stretched long across the tracks, his uniform marked by a war I had only ever read about. The station sounds dulled, even the wind seemed to wait. "That's you," the man said quietly, "and Thomas was the one who got you out." Clara shifted, her jaw tightening. "A pretty story," she muttered, but there was a tremor in it now. The man's gaze flicked to her, lingering just long enough to make her look away. "Name's Samuel Crow," he said, removing his hat. His hair was more silver than black, his face carved by years and distances. "Your uncle and I served together in 44. He owed your father his life, and when your father couldn't make it, Thomas kept his promise." His voice was rough, the kind of tone born from both pride and regret. My thoughts skittered back to the attic trunk Thomas never let me open. The smell of cedar, the brass keyhole, the way his hand would rest on the lid for a moment before turning away. "Why are you here now?" I asked. Samuel's answer was immediate. "Because he told me to come when he was gone, and because you've been living without the truth long enough." He reached into his coat again. This time, his hand emerged holding not another photo, but a brass key strung on a length of worn leather. The metal was warm from his palm, but it felt colder than iron in mine. "That opens the trunk," Samuel said, "and inside is the rest of your life story." The crowd's whisper swelled like wind through dry grass. Clara's eyes darted to the key, then to my coat pocket where the will still rested. The steam from the departing train curled between us, the platform briefly veiling Samuel's face. When it cleared, his expression had softened. Not pity, but something harder to name. "Thomas saved you from more than just the war," he said. "He saved you from what would have followed." Clara's lips parted as though to speak, but the words failed her. I'd never seen her speechless before. I slipped the key into my pocket, the weight of it pressing against the will. Samuel's voice dropped to a low rumble. "We can open it tonight. The old freight depot. No one else needs to know. Yet." His eyes flicked toward Clara on that last word. The implication was clear. She was not invited. But before I could answer, the station clock struck, each chime heavy as a hammer blow. Clara finally found her voice. "Don't go with him, Elias. You have no idea who this man is." Samuel didn't flinch. "And you do?" he asked. For a moment, their eyes locked, and I realized something. Clara wasn't just angry. She was afraid of what I might find. That fear was sharper than any insult she had ever thrown my way. The key felt heavier with every step we took away from the platform, though we hadn't yet left the station. I could feel Clara's gaze burning into my back, her heels striking the boards with sharp, angry rhythm. Samuel walked just ahead, his coat collar turned up against the cold, the set of his shoulders giving no hint of uncertainty. The night air tasted of coal smoke and something metallic, like the edge of a storm waiting beyond the horizon. "You think this is some grand adventure?" Clara's voice sliced the quiet, her tone dripping with contempt. "It's a mistake, Elias. That man is a stranger, and Uncle's will was probably written when his mind was already failing." Samuel didn't turn around, but the corner of his mouth twitched as if suppressing a bitter smile. "Thomas was sharp until the end," he said. "You know it, and so does everyone else in this town." Clara's retort caught in her throat, and I wondered if she was starting to realize her grip on the narrative was slipping. We reached the far end of the platform, where the lamplight grew thin and the shadows stretched like black cloth. Samuel stopped, turning to face me directly. "The depot's a mile from here. We can walk it in 20 minutes if we leave now." His voice carried the weight of command, the kind that doesn't invite debate. I glanced at Clara. She was pale, her eyes darting between Samuel and me as though she feared being left behind, more than she feared what we might find. "I'm coming with you," she said suddenly, her chin lifting in defiance. Samuel's stare was flat, almost bored. "No, you're not." The crowd that had followed from the platform shifted uneasily, their murmurs swelling. Clara's hand shot out, snatching for the key in my pocket. Reflex took over. I stepped back, her fingers catching only the edge of my coat. Clara! My voice rang sharper than I intended. Her hand trembled, but she didn't let her glare waver. You don't understand, she said, her voice low but urgent now, meant for me, alone. There are things in that trunk that could ruin everything, not just for me, for all of us. Her words clung to me like damp wool. Samuel's eyes narrowed. And that's exactly why we're opening it. The crowd murmured again, some siding with Clara's desperation, others leaning towards Samuel's grim certainty. The will in my pocket seemed to pulse, its words echoing in my head, buried under iron and steam. That phrase had lodged itself in me since I first read it. Samuel took a step closer, lowering his voice. He meant the old freight depot. That's where Thomas hid the truth. You've waited your whole life without knowing who you are. Do you want to keep waiting? I looked at Clara, whose lips were pressed so tight they'd gone white. Her eyes held no warmth, only fear. And for the first time, I realized it wasn't fear of losing money or property. It was fear of me learning something she couldn't control. My decision was made in that instant. Let's go, I said, turning toward the dark stretch of road that led to the depot. Samuel moved with me. Clara didn't follow. Not yet. The road to the depot was lined with skeletal trees, their branches scratching at the night sky like quills on parchment. Samuel walked in silence, his boots crunching the frost-dusted gravel. I followed, every step pulling me further from the familiar and deeper into the shadow of Thomas's secrets. The moon hung low and pale, casting the rusted rails in silver. Behind us, faint but steady, I could hear Clara's footsteps. She had chosen to follow after all. The depot emerged from the dark like a shipwreck lodged in the earth, its brick walls weathered, its windows clouded with years of dust. The scent of rust and old timber hit me before we even reached the doors. Samuel's lantern threw crooked light across the peeling paint and the warped boards that had been nailed across the entrance. He said it would still be here, Samuel muttered, more to himself than to me. With the precision of someone who'd done this before, Samuel pried away the boards and pushed the door inward. The air inside was colder, and the silence heavier. The lantern's glow revealed forgotten rail cars on parallel tracks, their paint faded and peeling. Samuel led me toward one at the far end, a freight car whose steel surface was scarred with deep gouges. Its door groaned as he slid it open. Inside was a compartment smaller than I expected, just tall enough for a man to stand in. Against the far wall sat an old trunk, its brass fittings dulled with age but intact. The key in my pocket seemed to grow warm at the sight of it. Clara stepped in behind us, her breathing quickened, each exhale visible in the cold. Samuel gestured toward the trunk. Go on. The key slid into the lock with unsettling ease, turning smoothly as though it had been waiting all these years for this exact moment. The lid creaked open, releasing a faint scent of cedar and paper, familiar and strange at once. On top lay a stack of oilskin-wrapped documents, tied with twine. Beneath them, a small tin box with dents along its sides. My hands trembled as I lifted it out. Samuel broke the twine and spread the documents across the floorboards. Birth certificates, letters, and a single official record written in a language I couldn't read. One birth certificate bore my first name, but the surname was unfamiliar. I stared at it, my mind scrambling to reconcile the letters. Clara's voice wavered. It's not real, but her tone lacked conviction. Samuel handed me the tin box. Inside was a black-covered journal, the leather cracked and soft from years of handling. I opened it and saw Thomas's handwriting, the loops and lines I'd known since childhood. The first entry was dated November 1944. As my eyes traced the ink, I read of smuggling missions. A betrayal that cost lives and a promise to raise the child of a fallen comrade as his own. My vision blurred. Clara's breath hitched. Samuel's gaze never left me. The lantern's glow trembled against the depot walls as I turned the pages, each line of Thomas's diary cutting deeper than the last. His words painted nights of frost-bitten air and whispered instructions, the constant risk of German patrols along the tracks. Then came the entry from December 3rd, 1944, a single paragraph that changed the way I saw every face in the room. The route was betrayed by one of our own. We lost 12 that night. Only the boy survived. My throat tightened. The ink was smudged there, as though Thomas's hand had shaken while he wrote it. Samuel stood still, his expression unreadable. Clara moved closer, peering over my shoulder, and for a moment her breath warmed my ear. Turn the page, she whispered. Not an order, but almost a plea. I did. The next entry named the betrayer. It wasn't Samuel. It was a Ward. The name struck me like a physical blow. Charles Ward, Thomas's younger brother, Clara's father. The room seemed to shrink around me, the cold biting harder. "No," Clara murmured, shaking her head. "That's not possible." But her voice was soft, too soft, as though she was arguing with herself. Samuel's eyes slid toward her, sharp and knowing. "You didn't think this would stay buried forever, did you?" Clara's arms wrapped around herself, and for the first time, her sharpness dulled into something almost fragile. "He was my father," she said, "but I only knew pieces. My mother told me not to ask." Her eyes met mine, and I could see something raw there, not hatred now, but shame. I realized she hadn't just been protecting her inheritance. She'd been protecting the Ward name from a truth she feared would destroy it. The rest of the entry revealed Thomas's choice, why he raised me as his own. Charles had wanted nothing to do with the child whose father he'd doomed, fearing the truth would follow. Thomas had sworn never to tell me until the boy was old enough to survive the knowing. I closed the diary, my fingers pressing hard against the leather, as though the words might seep into me through touch. The crowd that had followed us to the depot shifted, their whispers loud now. I could feel their eyes not on Clara but on me, on the boy who'd survived when 12 others hadn't. For the first time, the weight of that survival pressed down with its full force. Samuel's voice broke the silence. "The truth is your inheritance. More than land, more than money. It's the story that should have never been hidden." Clara looked at the floorboards, her shoulders hunched as though bracing for judgment. I wanted to speak, but my voice wouldn't come. In that moment I understood something Thomas had written earlier in the will, that debts of the soul are the heaviest kind. And now, one of those debts stood between me and the only family I had left. The tin box was still open beside me, its metal sides cold against the wooden floor. Beneath the journal lay one last envelope, its paper yellowed, but the handwriting on the front still bold. "To my son." My hands hesitated over it, feeling the weight of the words before I even broke the seal. Clara looked up, her face pale, as though she knew whatever lay inside would change everything again. The letter began simply, "Elias, my boy, my son in all the ways that matter." I felt the rest of the depot fade around me. Thomas's voice was alive in my mind, low and steady, the way it had been when he told me bedtime stories about trains. He apologized, not for raising me, but for hiding the truth. "I feared that if you knew the blood you came from, you would leave me behind. I could not bear that loss twice in my life." I swallowed hard, the words blurring on the page. Clara shifted beside me, her eyes glistening now. The letter turned toward her as well. "Forgive Clara. Her pride is her armor. She only wanted to protect the family name, and in her way, she thought she was protecting you from pain." Clara's breath caught audibly, and she pressed her lips together until they trembled. "Thomas wrote about the night he found me, bundled in a coat far too large, my father's watch tucked into the pocket. You were the last thing he asked me to save, Elias. And I swore I would keep that promise, no matter the cost." My fingers brushed unconsciously at my own coat pocket, as if expecting to find that watch there now. Samuel stood silently in the shadows, his face unreadable, but his eyes sharp. The final paragraph was different, short, urgent. "If you are reading this, the past has found its way to you. Do not run from it, and do not let it make you bitter. Blood is not the rail that binds us. Love is." The sentence settled into me like warm coal in winter, its heat slow but deep. I folded the letter carefully and slid it back into its envelope. Clara's voice broke the silence, small but clear. "I was jealous, Elias." She didn't look at me. "He loved you more than he ever loved me, and I hated you for it, but I never hated you for being here." The honesty in her tone surprised me more than the words themselves. The walls she had so carefully built were crumbling, and for the first time I saw her not as a rival, but as someone left adrift in the same storm. In the corner of the depot, Samuel shifted, his boots scraping against the wood. His gaze wasn't on us. It was fixed on a shadow beyond the doorway. A figure was standing there, watching. The lantern light caught on a pair of piercing blue eyes, old yet sharp. Whoever he was, he had heard everything. And by the way Samuel's jaw tightened, this man was not a stranger to him. The figure stepped out from the doorway's shadow, his movements deliberate, as though measuring the distance between himself and everyone in the room. His coat was worn to threads, his boots mud-caked, but it was his eyes, ice blue, unwavering, that held the air taut. Samuel stiffened beside me, his shoulders squaring in a way I hadn't seen before. Clara glanced between them, sensing something sharp beneath the surface. "My name is Joseph," the man said, his accent heavy but clear. "I'm the last living from the village, the one your uncle saved you from." His gaze slid to me, softened for a fraction of a second, then snapped back to Samuel. "And I know what happened that night. All of it." The depot's silence grew dense, the lantern light throwing stark lines across their faces. Samuel's jaw tightened. "This isn't your story to tell, old man." Joseph didn't flinch. "No, it is mine, because I buried my brothers, my mother, and my wife in the snow that night." His voice trembled only once, then steadied. "And I buried them because someone told the soldiers where we would be, that someone stood here, in this room, pretending to be a friend." A ripple went through the onlookers who had crept inside from the platform. My stomach turned cold before Joseph even said the name. Samuel Crow. The words fell like a hammer on stone. Samuel's hand twitched toward his coat pocket. Clara took a step back, her breath sharp. I realized then that Samuel hadn't moved closer to me all night. He had stayed where he could see the door and the exits. "That's a lie," Samuel said, his voice low, but fraying at the edges. Joseph's reply was immediate. "I saw you leave the fire that night. I saw you speak to the officer, and I saw the officer's men arrive before dawn." His hands curled into fists, though age had slowed their strength. "You tell yourself you did it to survive, but you didn't survive, you ran." The tension broke like a wire snapping. Samuel drew a small revolver from inside his coat, the metal glinting in the lantern light. A collective gasp filled the depot, the crowd pressing back toward the walls. Clara's hand shot to my arm, holding tight. Samuel's voice was almost calm. "You don't know what you're talking about. Some truths need to stay buried." I stepped between him and Joseph before I could think better of it, the will and Thomas's letter still heavy in my coat. Samuel's eyes found mine, something almost like regret flickering there. "Elias," he said softly, "you don't understand what's in that diary." Behind him the revolver's barrel swayed slightly, as though the weight of it was too much even for him now. But the danger in the room had only just begun to hum. The revolver's barrel gleamed like a second moon in the lantern light, its aim shifting between Joseph and me. The depot seemed to hold its breath, the only sound the faint creak of the wooden beams overhead. Samuel's eyes, once steady, now flickered with something close to desperation. "Hand me the diary, Elias," he said. "It's the only thing tying me to that night. Without it, they'll only have rumors." I tightened my grip on the journal, the leather warm against my palm. "So it's true," I said. It wasn't a question. Samuel's silence was answer enough. Joseph took a slow step forward, his voice steady despite the gun. "Give him nothing. He's had 70 years to confess. Tonight, he answers." The word struck Samuel like a lash, his jaw clenching harder with each syllable. Clara surprised me then. She moved between Samuel and me, her arms slightly outstretched, as if she could block a bullet through will alone. "If you shoot him," she said, nodding toward me, "you prove everything they've said about you." Samuel's hand faltered, the revolver dipping a fraction. His eyes darted to hers, reading something there I couldn't see. The crowd pressed closer now, their murmurs rising. Some called for the police, others for Samuel to put the gun down. I could feel the pressure building in the air, the way it does before a storm splits the sky. My fingers brushed the diary's spine, the choice clear before me. Hand it over and erase the past, or keep it and burn what remained of Samuel's reputation. I took a breath that felt like it reached all the way into my bones. "You said some truth should stay buried," I told him, "but this one's been buried too long." His shoulders slumped, the fight seeming to drain from him. Slowly, almost reluctantly, he lowered the gun to his side. It clattered against the floorboards when his grip finally loosened. 2 uniformed officers pushed through the doorway, their boots echoing. The crowd stepped back to let them through. Samuel didn't resist when they took his arms, but his gaze stayed locked on me. "You think you understand," he said quietly, "but you don't know what your father asked me to do." The words lodged like splinters in my mind as they led him away. The depot felt different after he was gone, lighter, but also emptier. Joseph exhaled slowly, his shoulders easing for the first time. Clara lowered her arms, her hands trembling. I looked down at the diary in my grasp, its weight heavier now than it had ever been. Whatever came next, it wouldn't just be my story. It would belong to everyone who had waited decades for the truth. Dawn crept in like a slow tide, bleeding pale light across the station's iron beams. The air smelled of wet coal and morning frost, the kind of cold that wakes every nerve in the body. I stood on the platform with the diary in my bag, its edges pressing against the worn leather, as if reminding me it was still there. still alive with the weight of what it carried. The 6:45 train idled, its steam curling into the waking sky. Clara stood a few paces away, her coat wrapped tight, her hair catching the first light. She didn't meet my eyes at first, only watched the tracks stretch into the distance. When she finally turned, her voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it. "I don't know if I can undo what I've done," she said, "but I'm sorry I tried to keep it from you." It wasn't absolution, but it was the closest thing to peace we'd had. Joseph had left before sunrise, disappearing into the crowd with the ease of a man who'd spent his life unseen. He had no parting words, only a brief touch on my shoulder, a gesture that spoke of debts paid and burdens shared. I watched him go, without calling out. Some goodbyes are better left unspoken. The train's whistle cut through the morning air, sharp and final. I stepped toward the carriage, my ticket already in hand. Clara's voice stopped me. "What will you do with it?" She meant the diary. I paused, my fingers brushing the bag's zipper. "Tell it," I said simply. Every word. Her eyes flickered. Fear, pride, and something like relief, all tangled together. I boarded, finding a seat by the window. The platform outside blurred in the condensation as the engine shuddered to life. Clara stayed where she was, her figure framed in steam, her hand lifted in a half-wave that felt like a truce. I raised my own in answer, knowing it might be the last time we stood in the same place without walls between us. The train rolled forward, the world outside beginning to move. I pulled the letter from my coat and read the last line again, letting it settle into the space Thomas had left behind. "Blood is not the rail that binds us. Love is." The words seemed to hum in the rhythm of the tracks beneath me, each clatter a promise to carry them forward. As the station faded behind me, I felt no triumph, no bitterness, only the strange stillness that comes when a long journey ends and another begins. The sun broke free of the horizon, spilling gold across the steel lines ahead. I leaned back, the diary warm in my lap, and let the train carry me into whatever waited beyond the bend. If you stayed until the end and enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another gripping tale like this one. Your support helps bring more stories to life. So, stick around, there's plenty more coming your way.